Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come. I once heard it said.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes below. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be traveling to Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, Paraty, Vinhedo, and Iguazu waterfalls. January 7th, 2008. At last it was time to make the final preparations for our 3-month tour of South America. Unfortunately, we were ill the week before and still felt pretty rough, so we thought we might have to postpone our trip. To be safe, we went to the doctor to have our chests examined in case one of us had an infection, as there had been a lot of it going around. The good news was that both of us were pronounced fit to travel. The bad news was that the nurse started talking about injections. I had lots of vaccinations when I was working for British Airways, and most of them were still valid, but she said I still needed hepatitis and typhoid. I hate injections as much as the next person, but before I had a chance to make up an excuse, she came at me like a Zulu warrior, and I was well and truly jabbed. To my surprise, I hardly felt a thing at the time, but that night it felt like Mike Tyson had used my arm as a punch bag. Although Federika was born in Dubrovnik, she grew up in Lima, Peru, so she was very keen to visit, and I was keen to see the place she had talked about so much. The long holiday was possible because I had retired the previous year, having been made redundant, at the ripe old age of 54. The redundancy came as a relief, as following the outrageous behaviour of my employer, I ended up with a nervous breakdown which ironically came to a head a few weeks after I had left work. The previous Christmas I had been unable to leave the apartment, let alone travel to deepest Peru. I still had an anxiety disorder, but my brother gave me a great piece of advice. Beware of your safe space. I followed his advice by forcing myself out of the apartment 3 times a day and walking a little further each time. Although I was far from cured, I had always loved travel and was determined not to let anxiety rule my life. Armed with diazepam to be taken in emergencies and some mindful awareness meditation audio files, I felt confident I would be all right. There was no last-minute panic, as I broke the habit of a lifetime and packed the day before. Our son kindly drove us to Heathrow Airport that played music from Dante's Inferno, the place, not the band, for the entire journey. I would have preferred to walk all the way, pulling our luggage, rather than endure that music. The airport was pretty quiet, and I was surprised at how quickly we went through check-in and security. We had to change in Paris, and just before landing, the pilot announced the flight connection information. We went to the gate we had been told, but our flight wasn't on the board. We stood around with other passengers waiting for our flight to show up, but it never did. We frantically asked around and discovered that not only did the pilot give us the wrong gate, but the correct gate was at the opposite end of the enormous terminal. I looked in horror at our boarding pass to see that our flight was leaving at 10:30 p.m. and it was 10:25. Despite being sure we had missed our flight, we ran to the gate and with great relief we saw people waiting to board. I had misread the boarding card and saw that the boarding time was 22:30, not the departure. It would still have been very tight, but the flight was delayed, so panic over. We were flying with Air France, and it was the first time I had been on a long-haul flight on seats that were intended for short-haul. I could hardly move, but had always been able to sleep in almost any circumstance, although Federika was not so lucky. We arrived in Rio de Janeiro at 9:30 a.m., where I had booked a transfer to our hotel. After a long flight, the last thing we wanted was to be arguing about prices with a taxi driver and worrying about being taken via Glasgow. The trouble with airport transfers is that they are great if they turn up, but if they don't, you end up worse off than without one. You have the choice of abandoning the idea and paying a second time, or hanging around hoping your taxi eventually arrives. There were lots of taxi drivers standing around with names on sheets of paper, but none of them were ours. Someone from another transfer company kindly contacted our taxi for us, and we were given the kind of excuse that was just too stupid to argue with, but they did say someone would be with us in 20 minutes. Half an hour later, we had given up and were walking towards the taxi rank when our driver finally showed up. At the hotel, we slept until lunchtime and another 3 hours after lunch. Even after all that sleep, we were still exhausted, but managed a trip to Ipanema Beach, which was only 1 block from our hotel. The beach was beautiful, with lots of places where we could hire sun loungers and umbrellas, which was essential for me as I found it uncomfortable lying on the sand for any length of time. The first thing that struck us was how busy the beach was and the extraordinary number of people walking around selling everything you could think of. Food, drinks, ice cream, jewellery, hammocks. Some were carrying mini barbecues where they cooked some kind of weird tapioca thing or prawns on a skewer. The places that hired sunbeds also sold chilled coconuts. People drank from them and threw the rest away. Brazilians didn't seem to have a culture of taking rubbish home with them and just left all their crap where they had been sitting. By the end of the day, the rubbish that piled up was pretty awful, but there was no shortage of labourers scouring the beach at night, making it nice and clean for the next morning. The sea was quite cold, and the waves were a little disconcerting. I tried to body surf, but it got a bit scary when I shot along the surface of the sand at what felt like the speed of light. I was on my way back from a swim with my back to the sea when a wave crashed into me and tossed me around like I was a leaf. I somersaulted twice and smashed my head on the seabed. It felt a bit like one of those terrible skiing crashes when you finally came to a stop and just lay there wondering what the damage was going to be, checking each limb to see if it was still in full working order. I had never experienced such powerful waves before and knew I had to take them more seriously in the future. Federika laughed and said the waves in Peru were much more powerful. It was amusing to see so many people walking down the high street in bathing costumes. It gave the impression that they were sitting at their office desk in their costumes all day, and now and then they popped down to the beach for a swim. The beach seemed to be divided into different sections. A gay section, one for families, one for old farts, one for youngsters, and I expect there were other groups that were not openly recognisable. There would have been a section for tattoo addicts, but that group spanned all sections. We were walking along the beach watching our first Brazilian sunset when suddenly everyone got to their feet and started clapping just as the sun disappeared into the sea. We were surprised at how strong the sun was, and although we both turned lobster colour, neither of us got burned, except for a little on Federika's feet. After a couple of days on the beach, it was time to do some sightseeing. We booked a tour starting at Corcovado to see the big statue of Christ with his hands outstretched as if he were checking for rain. Apart from the view, there was not much else to do, so we went to our next stop, the football stadium. It cost £6 to enter, despite being completely empty. Neither of us was interested, so we amused ourselves by looking at the footprints of all the great footballing legends. I had my photo taken standing in the footprint of one of the greatest footballers of all time, Edson Arantes do Nascimento, better known as Pele. I watched him play in the World Cup in 1962 when he was having trouble with one of his football boots. He lost patience with them and so took them off and proceeded to play brilliantly in bare feet, which I suppose was not surprising considering that was how he learnt to play. It turned out that Pele and I had the same foot size, which confirmed my suspicion that I could have been a great footballer if my dad hadn't persuaded me to become an apprentice electrician. Okay, I might never have made the grade as a professional footballer, but I definitely sucked at being an apprentice electrician. Next stop was the site of the world-famous carnival, which was a bit of a letdown. It was just a short stretch of road with banked seating on either side. Like most people, we had assumed that the carnival went through the streets, but no, it just went along that short stretch of road, one float at a time. You do get a sense of atmosphere in some empty venues, but I had seen dodos with more life in them than that street. The last stop was Pão de Açúcar, or Sugarloaf Mountain. It was basically the same as Corcovado, but without a statue, and you get to it by cable car. It did have a shop selling very impressive crystals, although way beyond our price range. One morning we went to the hippie market. I was afraid it was only for hippies, but they let us in, and to my surprise, I didn't see a single hippie all the time we were there. It was fun, and among other things we found 2 crystals that Federika was keen to buy in Brazil, even if they were probably imported from China. Most entertaining was an elderly footballer playing keepy-uppy, using his feet, shoulders and elbows. With Rio's reputation as being dangerous for tourists, I was a little apprehensive, but I can't say I ever felt intimidated. Everyone was very friendly, and we never saw any antisocial behaviour. We were surprised to find a lack of live music around Ipanema and Copacabana, so we took a half-hour taxi ride to Lapa where all the clubs were. I had never seen such a lively district with areas for everyone. Youngsters with no money could buy a can of beer from a street seller and hang out with their friends, enjoying the music that blared out from dozens of bars. Those who wanted to dance used the pavements as dance floors. People with money could go to clubs that had live music and air conditioning. We went to a club called Carioca da Gema, with 2 excellent bands playing Brazilian music. Surprisingly, we didn't pay for anything until we were ready to leave. When we entered the club, we were given a sheet of paper with a drink and food menu written on it, and every time we ordered something, they wrote it down on our menu. When it was time to leave, we paid at the bar and they tore off the stub for us to show the doorman. It seemed to me that I could have just torn off the stub myself and left without paying.
It started with a riff, just a simple riff with some attitude. It started with a riff, just the right feel and just the right mood. A riff like that is so hard to find. It started with a riff.
The places that hired beach chairs and umbrellas also offered drinks and coconuts that weren't paid for until we were ready to leave. Considering the beach was packed with thousands of people, it would have been easy to walk off without paying. For a city with such a reputation for thievery, it seemed strange that they were so trusting, or maybe cheating in Rio resulted in a one-way trip to the bottom of the ocean. Our hotel was pretty average, with the annoyance of having only one bedside table. It meant I had to put my selection of bedside goodies sprawled out on the floor next to me. We paid $60 a night, but the actual cost, as advertised on the door, was $120 a night. I couldn't imagine anyone paying so much for such a basic room, but I suppose during Carnival they could charge whatever they wanted. When planning the trip, we were worried that 5 days in Rio might not be enough, but we ended up feeling that it was 1 day too many. We enjoyed our stay, but were keen to move on and discover new places. We rose early for our journey to Paraty. I was dreading the 4-hour coach ride, as my only experience with coaches was those going from Brighton to Heathrow, where my knees touched the seat in front and I had to stand up when I wanted to change positions. Thankfully, the Brazilian coaches were in a completely different league. I could recline to an almost lying down position, and for longer journeys they even had coaches with beds. We arrived at Paraty around lunchtime and ate at a beach restaurant. Federika ordered some kind of prawn and pumpkin stew, and I ordered seafood risotto. Federika's came out first in a pot big enough to feed 6 people, and mine arrived in a pot that was even bigger. Neither of us was able to make even a small dent in our portions. When the waitress came to clear the table, she was surprised at how much we had left and kindly offered to keep the leftovers for the evening. As Federika's was much better than mine, we asked her to keep only that one. When we returned that night, we both ate to bursting point and there was still some left in the pot. The sea was the hottest I had ever known, which I assumed was due to Paraty being in a large, shallow bay. It was just about deep enough to swim in, although certainly no refreshment from the hot sun. The water was very murky, and whether that was down to dirt or plant life, I had no idea and didn't care. When I was young, we used to swim in the River Mole in Surrey, which had a pipe from the sewage works discharging into it, so it couldn't be any worse than that. The seabed felt like mud, so maybe it was just bits of sand floating around. In the early evening, we took a pleasant 5-minute walk to the old town. It was a small, pretty town where cars were forbidden. It used to be a Portuguese colony, and the locals had kept it exactly as it was when it was first built. The roads were made of huge stones and were quite difficult to walk on. There was live music in lots of restaurants, and the whole place was full of life. I had a stomach upset brewing for a couple of days, and by now it had developed into the worst case of the runs in Brazilian history. The town council was even thinking of naming a public toilet in my honour. Federika warned me that most people get stomach upsets in South America, but as I had a stomach like an ox, I hadn't been concerned. Fortunately, there was no pain or fever, and apart from the inconvenience, I felt fine. One day we tried a different beach, which was much better and cleaner, but it was still too shallow to swim, and even after paddling out 100 metres, the water was only up to our knees. Once we accepted that it was not so much a sea as a gigantic bath, we were happy just sitting there and splashing away like babies. We went on a boat excursion, stopping at 4 different beaches with lunch included. I hired a mask and snorkel, which was pointless as the sea was so murky I couldn't see a thing. I was spoilt by the sea in Croatia, which was always crystal clear. My stomach was not getting any better, so we went to the local clinic and asked for some stronger medicine than the over-the-counter pills I had been using. We were very impressed by what they called a hospital, although it wasn't much bigger than a house. It took nearly an hour to be seen, but it was worth it as the doctor gave me some medicine and some kind of tonic, as I was getting a bit weak by then. It worked like magic, so it wasn't long before I was able to eat like a pig again. Our hotel was very pleasant with a view of the sea. I was concerned that our room lacked privacy, as our terrace was next to the reception with guests walking only a few feet from us, but it was a small hotel, so we didn't see many people. On the plus side, we had a terrace to ourselves and a hammock which I had great difficulty getting out of, both physically and mentally. I could have just lain there all day without going anywhere. One irritation in both the hotels we had stayed in was not having a wardrobe, so we had to live from our suitcases, which I hadn't done since I was a teenager. We take wardrobes for granted until we don't have one. There were also no rubbish bins, so I suppose it does cut down on staffing costs when there are no wardrobes to clean or bins to empty. I bet hotel owners miss the days when 4 rooms had to share one bathroom. We left Paraty for the 6-hour coach journey to Sao Paulo. Again, it was a luxury coach driving along a beautiful coastline, but there were hundreds of speed bumps, so by the time we arrived at our destination, my neck was quite sore. Sao Paulo coach station was enormous, with hundreds of platforms, which was not surprising considering that Brazil had very little in the way of a rail network. We changed coaches for the 2-hour journey to a small town called Vinhedo, where Federika's friend Wata lived. The journey should have taken 40 minutes, but it took an hour just to get out of the terrible Sao Paulo traffic. Wata and her husband Thomas were waiting for us at the coach station, and there was great excitement when they saw us get off the bus. Federika and Wata went to school together and had known each other since they were 7 years old. They lost touch for decades, but found each other again through the internet. We were taken to their house, which was large and weirdly built with so many rooms in odd corners that I frequently got lost. There was a large garden with lots of wild monkeys and a swimming pool. Thomas put some bread out for the monkeys for my benefit, but they weren't interested as there was a lot of food around for them at that time of year. One of them did eventually deign to investigate, but when it saw that it was nothing more than a small crust of bread, it looked up in disgust and ran off. In the afternoon we had a barbecue with lots of their friends, but as always with barbecues, I ate too much and felt very uncomfortable. With a set meal on your plate, there is less potential for overindulgence, as you can see how much food you have to get through. With barbecues, there is a never-ending supply, so you have no idea how much you have eaten. When we are young, we get a message sent from our stomachs to our brains telling us when we have eaten enough. As we get older, it takes longer for that message to get through, so we continue to eat until long after the message is sent. I don't know if that is a scientific fact, but if it isn't, it should be. Next morning, Federika and Wata went to a shopping mall, whilst Thomas and I went for a pleasant walk in the country in what looked like a cowboy ranch without horses. It started to rain heavily, so by the time we got back to the ranch bar, we were drenched. I was quite cold, and as we still had an hour to kill before meeting up with Federika and Wata, I had to borrow a top that Federika had left in the car. It was several sizes too small, and would have made Arnold Schwarzenegger look effeminate, but it did the trick, even if I did have to endure sniggering from the waiters.
It takes a real man to cry, a real man to sigh, to stand by his emotions, look them in the eyes, say this is who I am, and I'm not afraid to say these are tears of pride, and I will not look away.
Our next destination was Puerto Iguazu on the Argentine side of the famous Iguazu Falls. The flight took nearly 2 hours, and this time our airport transfer was efficient and friendly, so we were happy that our waterfall tours were booked with the same company. Our hotel, Los Helechos, was what we travellers refer to as crap. It was recommended by Federika's cousin, who had booked another hotel which was so bad that he and his wife walked out and went to the Los Helechos instead. God knows what the other hotel must have been like. It was very hot, and we had the choice of a room with a big fan in the ceiling or one with air conditioning, which we had to pay extra for. Neither of us liked air conditioning, but the ceiling fan was so noisy that it felt like the whole room was going to take off. We tried the air conditioning, but it had an awful damp smell, so in the end we opted for the good old-fashioned open window method, and were both so tired we slept like babies anyway. Outside our hotel was a large neon sign saying, Hotel Los Helechos. During the day no one noticed anything unusual about the sign, but at night only 3 lights were working, so the sign read, Hell. I'm sure it was a coincidence, but I wouldn't have been surprised if some well-meaning locals had climbed up and removed the bulbs necessary to give an accurate description of the hotel. The town and its shops were quite tatty for such a famous tourist attraction, but everything was very cheap, so I suppose you can't have everything. There were lots of very old cars, which looked like they were held together by rust and elastic bands. There couldn't have been any kind of annual inspection of cars like in most countries, or if there was, it must have been limited to counting the wheels and checking that there was a steering wheel. On the plus side, it had an excellent internet cafe, and unlike Brazil, most people spoke English. I did try to speak Spanish when the opportunity arose, and was pleasantly surprised on the rare occasion when someone understood me, but with Spanish being Federika's first language, I didn't get much of a look in. Following a regal hotel breakfast of bread, jam and coffee, we went on our first tour of the waterfalls. There were 2 main tours, one on the Argentinian side and one on the Brazilian side, which was the one we started with. It involved walking along a long, narrow wooden path suspended above ground. It was awkward at times, as there were so many tourists that in some places there wasn't enough room to walk side by side. It was well laid out, with a magnificent view of the waterfalls at nearly every turn. Sometimes there was a huge range of waterfalls in the distance, and sometimes there would be one right next to us, so we got wet with the spray, but it was hot, so we were dry in no time. Some of the more spectacular viewing areas had queues, but it didn't take long to get to the front. Thanks to Federika's excellent planning, we were able to do the full moon tour. This was only available during the 3 or 4 days of full moon each month, and only when there was no cloud. They took a maximum of 160 people, so we booked well in advance. Most of the trail was what we had seen during the day, but it looked completely different at night and was a very special experience. Apart from the waterfalls, there were large expanses of still water which reflected the moon. Next morning we did a full-day tour of the Argentina side, and what a day it was. We were picked up at the hotel at 7:30 a.m. and taken to the National Park entrance. From there it was a 15-minute train journey to the Garganta de Diablo waterfall, the Devil's Throat. It got its name from the days when local Indians went fishing in their boats and were never seen again. They concluded that if they went too far down the river, the devil appeared and swallowed them up because of their sins. The viewing area was at the top of the waterfall, and we were practically hanging over as we watched the water falling over the edge into what really did look like the Devil's Throat. The power was so great that it created a lot of spray, and although everyone got soaked, the sun was so strong we soon dried off. There was a 2-kilometre metal catwalk which took in the extraordinary sight of all the waters leading to the waterfalls. We were lucky to see a couple of toucans in flight, but apart from that there was not much in the way of wildlife. Next, we took a train to the upper trail, where there was another long walk, but fortunately most of it was in the shade. We walked closely to many of the waterfalls, and again there seemed to be no end to the spectacular sights. We reached a clearing where a large 4x4 open truck waited to take us on a 20-minute ride through what they ambitiously called a jungle. The truck left us at the start of another short trail which led to the main event, a boat ride that took us to the base of the waterfalls. On the boat, they gave us life jackets and some plastic bags to put anything that needed protection from the water. We sped quickly along the river that led to the edge of a huge waterfall and waited in anticipation. The driver was a bit of a showman and hovered around the entrance, so we weren't sure just how far we would go. We were only inches from the waterfall and getting wet from the spray when he turned the boat around. We were all relieved to be pulling away, but after stopping and waiting a few seconds for dramatic effect, he reversed into the waterfall until it felt like someone was emptying 1,000,000 buckets of water over us. Everyone was screaming and laughing, and of course, it was fantastic fun. One of the crew sat at the front of the boat filming us, which made a priceless souvenir. Despite the cheap ponchos they gave us, we were soaked, but after a long walk up a steep hill in the hot sun, we were already dry. I was surprised at how well organized the tours were. There were multilingual guides strategically placed, so it was impossible to take a wrong turn, as there was always someone to guide us onto the right path. They picked us up exactly on time, and everything went like clockwork. It was an exhausting morning, so after a splendid lunch, we returned to the hotel for an afternoon nap and a casual stroll around the town. It was the perfect day. Next morning we checked out of our hotel at 10 a.m. and had 5 hours to kill before our taxi took us to the airport. The hotel had a pool, and we had planned to hang out there, but it was more like a dirty puddle, so we gave it a miss and pottered around the shops instead. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website, www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Word Banker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to Buenos Aires in Argentina and Lima in Peru.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your songs. A minstrel and a king unite